Imperial and Furia are of course out of the PGL Antwerp Major, back to the trash can they call Brazil. Now, you know what? Even though Fury had some good games, Imperial had an interesting run, it was a fun storyline, it was never going to last, was it? Obviously, if you saw, all those days and days and days of talent, pro players, the broadcast, just pandering to a baying mob who send out death threats and repeatedly use threats of violence. And obviously it goes without saying what their whole sexual angle that they go with. Yeah, not really that cool, is it? Sort of leaves a bad taste in your mouth. Well, if you want to wash that away with something delicious that'll give you a bit of energy to perk you up after all that BS, how about Gamer Subs, which is obviously sugar-free, keto-friendly energy formula. This is one of my favourites. Guacamole Gamer Fart 9000. It's actually strawberry and lime. It's delicious, if you ask me. Really nice. Also, if you want to try a different flavour out, I often name a couple of flavours. You probably think, like a lot of plebs, I'd love to have a cold one with it. You probably don't think that, because let's be real, I actually give it to y'all the way you deserve it. But with other people, you go, I'd love to have a beer with them, have a cold one. That'll never happen, because A, like I just mentioned, let's be real, I would never have a beer with you. And then B, I don't even like beer, but you know what? You could have a cold one, because they've got the cold ones range here. These are basically like the flavours of cocktails, but they're Gamer Subs. So this one's pina colada, and it tastes just like the pina colada cocktail. You have the fruitiness with the pineapple, and then you have the coconut aftertaste, which is quite refreshing at the end. So it's quite cool. Obviously, be great to have on, Ipanema Beach or whatever, while you're watching, Art walk around with his arse out. I think I've seen too much of that already this week, but whatever. So let's get into the last two quarterfinals of the PGL Antwerp top 8. We obviously had the first two already. You had Spirit indeed completely upset over Furia. Furia looked quite bad overall. Spirit is obviously on an insane heater. Then you had the FaZe clan against NIP game. As I told Monty on the Competitive Edge show, I actually thought the odds were solid for NIP, and you know what? It was looking on the third map, but they're actually going to win that. Still, this is how good FaZe is. FaZe almost won 2-0. So I actually think all in all, great series, great warm-up for FaZe. FaZe got through, upset from Spirit. We're still on for a potential FaZe versus NAVI, Heroic or ENCE final, so still a very good chance of a banger final, unless Spirit indeed can pull the absolute miracle, go all the way. So let's look at this other side of the bracket now, the one with some of the big names for the tournament. After FaZe, the other favourites, quite frankly, the other top three teams in my opinion, are on this side of the bracket, especially now NIP's gone out and it turns out they couldn't get it done anyway. ENCE versus Copenhagen Flames. ENCE being here is not a surprise overall. Look, inexperience could potentially have cost them in the previous phase, but I did think the map pool's too good, the veto's too good, the players are too good right now, Snappy's on his game. I always thought ENCE was coming to this phase of the tournament. Copenhagen Flames, I absolutely did not. And actually, I think when you look back, props to them for the games they did win and the odd game they won over big teams, but I'm telling you, go back to their RMR, look who they beat there. Go to the PGL Major, look who they beat there. This team actually is a pretty weak team to be in the round of 8 of a major. I think if you go back and look even, their map pool is absolute nonsense, mate. They have loads of maps. They basically only have 2 they have a losing rate on, because technically they play all 7 if you go back enough months. Right? They've got 4 with massive amount of wins, and you just go and look who they're playing. First of all, they lose to tons of teams and bomb teams you haven't even heard of, and they don't have that many wins over the big dogs. It's the odd one here and there. But do you know what's funny? They do have a few wins over ENCE, actually, because obviously once upon a time these teams would be considered similar level, right? It's just ENCE sort of took away from them recently and peeled away and became, you have to say, an elite team, except they haven't won the tournaments yet, right? So I think this is actually an interesting matchup in the sense that Copenhagen Flames is the big underdog to me, even though ENCE players are not super experienced playing a stage setting. They've basically never been here at a major. So I think there is a lot of parity in terms of who'll be more nervous, how that angle will go. Both teams, in theory, have deep map pools, and veto in quite an interesting manner, and pick in quite an interesting manner. But I actually think overall, I am pre-match heavily tilting this towards ENCE, because I think the inexperienced thing makes it a wash. I think firepower-wise, ENCE has to be far and away. They're like the second ranked team in the tournament right now if people don't have firepower, because Spinks is second in the whole tournament as a player, and Dycha is third, the Polish rifler. So it doesn't even matter that Hades just doesn't hold up that much on tier 1, does he? I said this ages ago, but people had to rave about when he smashed smaller teams or just online only tournaments with no stage, but you'll see about that. Now, to be fair, it's like Nikodos is some god of the AWP. He's like a solid enough player. I also think the Copenhagen Flames players, they've got okay firepower, but even a couple of them, like Zyphon, I don't know that I buy that he can keep those numbers up. So I think actually, map pool, listen, I give it to ENCE, but it's not that bad in terms of the matchup. There's even an interesting angle on the veto aspect when we get into it. But I do think firepower is heavily going to go over to the ENCE side, and I don't think the op battle really even matters. Then for IGLs, Snappy is a much better, much more experienced IGL than Huxley, although Huxley certainly has built a name for himself these last couple of years, even going back to Flashpoint 2. If people don't know, the Mad Lions team that was almost beat the Virtus Pro team that won the tournament, that famous train game where Refresh pushed on the alley, right? So I think you go and look at it. This is where, for me, I want to know if Copenhagen Flames gets Q. Because if I'm them, I would go mad in this veto, and I would try and make it really crazy. And as a result, I would make it so that, like, ENCE can get their maps, but let's see what you want to do when I pick these into you. So if you look at it, right, ENCE are the favourites. They have a pretty good record, and they've played tons of games of Mirage. It's actually just impressive how many big teams they're able to beat. Tons of top 10 teams. Nuke, they have a phenomenal record on. It's a map they absolutely love. Sure, they lose to some of the top teams, but they've got so many big scalps as well. Ancient's a very good map. By the way, if you can play Ancient, Nuke, Mirage, like, who plays all three that's going to be better than you with more firepower than ENCE? That's why ENCE is actually legit an elite team. They just have to also get some championships to be like a potential #1 contender. They're just an elite team right now. Then, like, Vertigo's all right, Overpass is all right, Dust 2's all right. Like, ENCE has had a pretty good run of it the last few months, and they've played tons of top teams, unlike Copenhagen Flames. Copenhagen Flames have a phenomenal record on Vertigo, but like I said, there's a lot of empty calories in there, and a lot of losses to lower teams. They have a very good record on Nuke. Okay, that's a solid one right there. Obviously a map that the guys from ENCE have always liked. Overpass, they have a very good record on. Now that's obviously one of the lower maps for the guys from ENCE. And then Ancient, they're also very, very good on, which is similar, except obviously ENCE has better opposition that they've won against overall then, haven't lost to a lot of the bombs. So the interesting part for me, this really is the veto for this one. I think that is the biggest aspect of what can even give Copenhagen Flames a chance. Otherwise, if they veto incorrectly, I don't actually think they're going to win. Even though I do think there isn't a bad veto. Like, there's not one that auto loses them. I just think it puts them on even ground, and then ENCE will win as a result by being the better team across the board in most of the key positions. Basically all the key positions, if we're being honest. So, if we look at these two teams, ENCE, spoiler, just always bans Inferno. That's why they're really good with the other 6. They have a permit, and then they mess around with the other 6. The guys from Copenhagen Flames half ban Inferno, but sometimes that was because Dust 2 was banned. Half ban Dust 2. So, it depends on the opponent, right? Obviously, Inferno's the ban of Copenhagen Flames, and Dust 2 is one of the worst maps, actually, for ENCE. So, you know, actually banning Dust 2 out makes it even for ENCE as well from the Copenhagen Flames side, because they haven't shown they're going to ban anything else. In terms of picks, you go and you look. Vertigo's the biggest pick for Copenhagen Flames. You go and look on the side of ENCE, and it's a mixture of, they do Mirage, they do Nuke, they'll pop an Ancient if it's a punish. I really like, generally, in a different sense, how these teams are vetoing. What I like then is, second ban, it's mainly Mirage over on the side of Copenhagen Flames. And it's a very varied second ban. This is an underrated aspect, how you do your second ban. There's Vertigo a bunch of times. There's a couple of Ancients. Then there's the Mirage, the Overpass, depending on who you're playing against for ENCE. So let's put it all together and do the veto. If we imagine ENCE goes first, obviously I can't know who goes first these ones, I don't know what the system is. If ENCE bans Inferno and Copenhagen Flames bans Dust 2, just shake hands on that one. I mean, I would say this. If you're really willing to, you haven't won on it, look, there's a universe where you could gamble and pick Dust 2. I would never do that personally. I think that is too bonkers. There's a universe where you float it and challenge ENCE to pick Dust 2. Here's the thing, I don't think they would. I think they'll just stick with theirs. So actually, in this scenario, despite the fact it's your first time in the top 8, you're going to be nervous. They're not. They're probably going to ban Dust 2. It'll be boring. I, though, would understand I'm the underdog. I'm sure these teams even scrim. But I would just say float it. I'll gamble you to waste your pick on Dust 2. And then instead, if you do, I think actually it gives me a slight edge in the series. So that's one of those ones where I do things differently. I expect they'll do it a little bit boring. So let's say they ban Dust 2. ENCE, I actually think will just pick Mirage. It's their most played map. It's a map that they pick quite often. I think it's just a map that you can have a fantastic chance on, especially bearing in mind they also play Ancient. And do you really want to pick... what else could you pick? You could pick Nuke, I guess, but that's also a really good map for Copenhagen Flames. I think you just pick your Mirage. It suits your team. It suits the fragging style. It suits the simple calling. It suits some of the tactical style that they like to run as well. I actually think also it's a little bit forgiving for Hades, maybe. That's actually a map I think I would take. I think it's a pretty good pick. I think they would be favoured to win it as well. Copenhagen Flames should obviously pick Vertigo, but remember, actually the guys from ENCE can play it. Sure, they've had some losses like to Copenhagen Flames, but they've also beaten Copenhagen Flames on it, and they've beaten teams like Outsiders, so NIP, so these are quality squads. Sure, I actually will say, if Copenhagen Flames can get their shit together, this can be a chance to win a map and go 3 maps. Like I said, the veto actually should work out okay in the end. Then the second rotation bans are what I want to see. Now, I expect ENCE, I think logically, if it's available now, you just ban out Overpass. You just say, get out of the pool. Even though I'm pretty good on it, I've had a bunch of losses recently. Also, I don't need to play it. So if I take that out, I'm leaving Copenhagen Flames with a choice of Nuke or Ancient. Well, spoiler, those are 2 of my top 3 maps. So I've got the veto in a great spot. I'm going to get an insurance for the 3rd map, right? So basically, I actually think of the 2, because the guys from Copenhagen Flames, even though they have banned Nuke, and it's not like they banned Ancient, I actually think they will just follow through with that. Ban Nuke, Ancient should be the decider. And so if you are the guys from ENCE, you're going to get 3 of your top 4 maps, potentially, if you think Vertigo's better than Overpass for them. I guess that's more questionable. And if you are the guys from Copenhagen Flames, I think you are going to get 1 of your best maps. And this is why banning Nuke's crazy, because obviously it's a good map for them. It's just, I don't know if you can, I don't think you can dare have Nuke be the decider. And then you end up with Vertigo's obviously the map that's fantastic for you. Mirage is pretty good, but Mirage is actually like more down there. It's been all right. And then Ancient, I actually think would be a pretty solid map between the 2, but I favour ENCE to win that one. I also think their players just look fantastic on that map when they do play it. And even though Copenhagen Flames won it recently, so actually I think psychologically there's reasons Copenhagen Flames can feel like they have a chance in this series. I think this is a really fun one overall. I expect ENCE to win it, and I think it's big for the tournament if they do. I don't think Copenhagen Flames can possibly get past NAVI or Heroic in the next round. So let's go to that other matchup, NAVI versus Heroic. Now, first of all, let's be real. This could be a major final. This could have been this major final. This could be a major semi-final. I actually think Heroic has been very hard done by it after playing NAVI at this point in the tournament. Like, look at all those other opponents you could have played against. But they also need to get over the hump of beating NAVI and then winning a tournament. Now, they've beaten NAVI. That's one of the key things about Heroic. That's one of the things we love about them. They beat a couple of times. But they don't win the tournament. So let's just run down some factors. The problem they have is, unlike the last one, they have an AWPer who's not necessarily the strongest AWPer in Cadian, right? Andy has to IGL. He's nowhere near the AWPer Simple is. So Simple will brutalise him. The AWPer matchup is heavily towards NAVI. In terms of IGLs, I'd actually say Cadian possibly calls a slightly better game or a better mid-game than Boomich. But I think the problem is NAVI players like Simple when he's at his best, how him and Electronic, when Electronic was good and they worked with Bit was very interesting. That's not really there right now. Electronic's actually having a really bad time on LAN at the moment for me. Boomich also looks like he's dropped off. So there are some elements in which I think Heroic can have a slight edge. The problem is, Perfecto is a better clutch player, probably than Shush or most of the players on Heroic, and he is fragging out of his mind so far in the tournament. He's making up for what Electronic's not doing. So I think Heroic has to really walk a tightrope and play fantastically, maybe over all 3 maps. They can lose any of them, I think. And then even then, there's the Simple factor. Bit, if you don't know, Bit, Simple and Electronic, and Perfecto rather, are like 3 of the top 5 or 6 for NAVI. Again, we're back to that status where they have so much firepower. And that's with Electronic not doing that well. So they're not as scary as they were before. Meanwhile, Heroic, Stown is a monster. Obviously, he's done really, really well. But you look at the squad overall, it's more by committee, as they usually do, with a bit more even distribution. So the heavy hitters are on NAVI for me. Now, the interesting thing is when we get into this, look at the map pools. First of all, both teams haven't been playing as crazy amount as some of those teams, the Copenhagen Flames, that play the bazillion lesser games of the ENCEs, right? Because they play mainly just Tier 1 and LANs, right? So NAVI has a phenomenal record on Mirage. They've won 11 of their last 15. They've beaten so many squads. One of those losses was the 14-16 loss to NIP. Yeah, I mean, and one of the losses also was an Astralis overtime loss way back. I think it was a Blast or something. So, man alive, this team is phenomenally good on Mirage. That always was a good map for them in the past, but obviously they used to go to Nuke as their home map, right? Now it's Mirage, because it's about fragging. It's about, Simple's always going to be a monster on that one, let's be real. So, that's a map they love. Ancient, they're undefeated on the last 3 months. Some decent sized wins there, beating the likes of NIP, Astralis. These are teams that definitely play it. Then it gets a bit dodgy, though. It isn't that monster win rate record that NAVI had at the last major. Like Inferno, they're only 4-3 on that recently. Then you got Nuke, they're 3-3. That's right, they're Nuke. That was like, what, 17 games in a row, something, or 20 games in a row, something. Now they're only 4-3. I think it was 17 or 18, wasn't it? Then they have their overpass, always been semi-questionable for them. They are 4-2 on it, but they've lost against NIP, they've won against NIP, they've won against ENCE, they've lost against FaZe, they've won against EG, they've won against Heroic. It's like, that still feels like a map that sometimes can get a bit naughty for you and can potentially cause you problems. And In fact, I think Heroic tried to punish pick that into them. And then Dust 2, they have a positive win rate on. Spoiler, Na'Vi doesn't have negative win rates. They just have a tie on Nuke and they don't play Vertigo, ever. They lost to MIBR, which is bad. They lost to FaZe, but they've also beaten FaZe on Dust 2. So you know what? You look over the side of Heroic. Na'Vi's still got a good map pool. It isn't the monster map pool of before. And there's not as much wiggle room, in my opinion, unless you're really going to rely on Simple and your star powers and your fragging power. Spoiler, they do have Meg fragging power again, overall. Heroic obviously loves Nuke. We all know that still, but they've had a few key losses at this tournament on it. They love Overpass, seemingly always have. Yeah, they lost to Vitality. I mean, like, look at fucking, like, there's like D-Glaces and shit, like some ridiculous stuff, but they've beaten ENCE a few times on that. They lost to Na'Vi on that one. They've beaten Astralis. Like, there's back and forth. Vertigo, they have a very good record on. Obviously, Na'Vi doesn't play that, so that's somewhat irrelevant. Inferno, they have a pretty good record on. They've had some big wins. They've beaten Na'Vi. They've beaten Vitality. They lost to FaZe. Mirage is a bit more up and down. Like, they can beat the likes of Virtus Pro and Vitality. Then they lost to ENCE. They lost to ENCE twice. They lost to Na'Vi twice. Then Ancient. I mean, it used to be an alright map. They've won 1 out of their last 4. They've lost to Astralis. They've lost to Team Liquid. They've lost to ENCE. That's a pretty poor map overall. Do not play is, of course, Dust 2, which is always the perma, except the one time when they played, I think it was Vitality here, and they just banned Ancient because Vitality has a bit dodgy map pool. So here's the key thing for me. Na'Vi can do a normal veto and they should still win. But Na'Vi could also mind game quite a lot into the pick phase of this major. And let's get into that. So here's the issue for me, is when I look at it, it's going to be Na'Vi bans Vertigo, right? I mean, you should do. It's a fantastic map for Heroic. It's your permaban anyway. You just don't ever play it. So you banned Vertigo. I think Heroic, they follow through. They banned Dust 2, right? The reason why they banned Dust 2 is because it's not like Na'Vi's great on it, but they don't play it in Heroic. Sadly, they used to have that as a 7-map veto and occasionally play. They just don't play it at all now. I think that's a shame, but whatever. They're trying to do what they're trying to do, and they've got their own philosophy on the game. When you come to the picks, though, this is where it gets very interesting. I think you can go anywhere on this one. So Na'Vi, in terms of history, should just pick Mirage, right? That's the map. They've even beaten Heroic a whole bunch of times on it. I would say that's the safe one to pick. With that said, though, as much as it's not a great map from the guys from Heroic, they've always had a decent enough T-side calling on it. I've always thought their players played out some of the clutches on that map fairly well. There's a world where if some of the Na'Vi players don't turn up or don't frag out, I think someone like Bit has a lesser game. He's obviously doing monster numbers right now. I think it's plausible you could steal that maybe, but even so, it should, if it's picked, be the Na'Vi win. But the other option, if you're Na'Vi, is to punish pick Ancient. It hasn't been a good map for the guys from Heroic. I don't know that you can even prep as much for it because Na'Vi's won the last 6 games, including against some big name teams. And listen, it's a gamble for Na'Vi because I also, like, as much as they're 6-0, I think that's a little bit of an uncomfortable map too. I think you never feel totally comfy unless you just don't let the fucking T's on the site. So I don't know about that personally, but it depends if Na'Vi want to do some mind games and also maybe imply that you might do that in later series so people have to really consider it, right? So I'm going to say they probably picked Mirage, but they could go to Ancient. I think for Heroic, the logical pick is just Overpass, because it's a great record for you. But you lost to Na'Vi last time on that. So if you don't want to do that, the other option is pick Inferno. Strong map for you. You've beaten Na'Vi on it. It's more middling for Na'Vi. They used to be very good on it, obviously, when they were at their peak. This is the time where maybe, I mean, they've won a bunch of their recent games, but maybe you can feel like that's a 1. I would probably just go, if I'm being safe with the Overpass pick, I would probably slightly favour the guys from Heroic. But the firepower of Na'Vi will have a massive effect on that game, in my opinion, and even the psychological battle of beating them previously. Let's say they do that. Now, the second ban, I actually think for Na'Vi, you just ban Inferno traditionally, but it's not like that's that monster map overall. No, actually, that is a very good map for Heroic, but the option is this. If Overpass... Basically, it depends on what Heroic pick. If they pick Inferno, you ban Overpass. If they pick Overpass, you ban Inferno. Either way, you end up with the last ban going to Heroic. And I think what will be left is Ancient and Nuke. So what you're saying there is pick 2 of our favourite maps as Na'Vi. And admittedly, 2 maps in terms of Nuke that you like and Ancient that you don't. So I've given you a pretty obvious one. That one's not actually much of a mystery in my opinion. The guys from Heroic will ban Ancient. So the decider in my world, it ends up being Nuke. And I actually think that's really sexy because if we get there, obviously that isn't the impossible fortress that it was for Na'Vi last year. Meanwhile, it's always a map that Heroic have liked. It's always one they'd be able to get canny wins on, even though they've lost a couple of times at this major. But they've obviously beaten Na'Vi on it in the past. So I think that would be a really exciting third map. The issue is this. I just still get the vibe that this could be a great back and forth series. If I had to guess, if Heroic show up, it will be 3 maps. I still think Na'Vi will win. I think there's a possibility Na'Vi 2-0s. I actually don't think, even though certainly the maps don't make it impossible, I don't think Heroic's going to 2-0. I just don't think all Na'Vi's players can shit the bed. Simple can do nothing. Perfecto disappears. Like, even with the Boomich and Electronics now, I don't think they get 2-0. I think this is a close. It's a 3-map series even if they lose. I do fairly heavily favour Na'Vi, though, overall. And I have to say, I actually think this is going to be a great series, and I hope it is one of the best in the tournament, and I hope whoever wins can really potentially go to the final, because whoever it is should have a great series against ENCE, I think, in the next round, and then hopefully, I just think, FaZe in the final. Let's put any of these squads against them, we can have some great lines. Now, obviously, if you've been enjoying, like the aforementioned Competitive Edge show, or Snake and Banter, Counterpoints will return after the major, Revenge by the Numbers is coming very soon, go to the Insight on Esports CSGO channel, and of course, subscribe there. And you too can watch all those shows that I don't do on this channel. And I'll be back with some of the rest of the major.
Hello, this is Neo, just an average CSGO player, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.